in the study of the scriptures that Brother Stanley and I did, we found out that that couldn't be true, because Shem was not the oldest son. There was a son older than Shem. Now, one of the qualifications of the high priest of the world would have been that he was kin to every human being that was alive. After the flood, after Noah and Mrs. Noah died, there would be one man who was kin to everybody that existed, one way or the other. Somebody will say, well, he couldn't have been kin to Japheth's wife. And the answer to that question is, I don't think that you can make that statement with security, because it was usual that people who were doctrinally correct and straight and followed God married whom? The problem that caused the confusion and the uproar before the flood was that the sons of God married the daughters of men. Now, if Noah was righteous, and he was, and Noah had 3 sons, and he began to build the ark, and he brought these people aboard, who would their wives have been? Had to be in the family.
Well, I thought it said Noah was perfect in his generations. Is that what that means?
It means a lot, but you're right. The word perfect there in the Hebrew language doesn't mean complete. It doesn't mean sinless.
No, I mean genetically.
But yeah, but as far as comparing themselves by themselves, Noah was the man. And his 3 sons married women, but he also had a wife. Has anybody ever found out the name of Sister Noah? Well, I found it out. It's Sister Noah. If that makes me more intelligent, it's just it's supposed to be a joke. But mentioning him, he is there, sir.
The wife of Noah is named Naamah. Naamah.
Okay. Says who?
Says Google.
Oh, says Google.
And go to Google this.
It's gotta be right. On the internet, it's gotta be right.
And so, whose daughter was?
It gives references to Genesis 7 and 7 as well.
All right, let's look at Genesis 7 and 7. I'd like to be introduced to Sister Noah.
It gives 2. It says Genesis 4:22 and Genesis 7 and 7.
All right, let's go to Job, since Genesis 4 and 22 is first.
Right there it says, and Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every
Artificer. So who was Tubal-Cain, the son of?
And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Zillah was the daughter or mother of Tubal-Cain. Tubal-Cain was the sister.
The son of Lamech. Right?
Yes.
Well, don't need to guess. How do I know?
And out of there, Jabal, J-A-B-A-L.
Jabal.
And he was the father of such as dwelt in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his mother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of brass and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah.
Well, now, I don't know that that's true, but I don't know that it's false. But I do know that it has maybe some merit, except for one thing.
Two different families. Right? Two different houses, two different families.
Worse than that.
Two different tribes?
Worse than that.
Two different religions.
Actually true. But the truth is that if that is true, they have Noah marrying a daughter of Cain.
Yeah. Sure.
That ain't cool.
No.
Let's prove it, if that's true. Look at the 17th verse of the 4th chapter of Genesis. I mean, all we got time to do is study the Bible, and let's find out all we can find. Yeah. And it says Cain knew his wife. By the way, what was Cain's wife's name? See if Mr. Google knows that. Sir?
No.
No. I'm not talking about Noah.
Mrs. Cain.
Mrs. Cain. Well, I went, and we wouldn't call her sister, would we?
Cain's wife was she doesn't give you a good answer. After he killed Abel indicates that they were likely more other children, perhaps even grandchildren.
Likely, yeah, likely. Yeah, if they're going to go build a city, it's likely there's more than one guy doing it. No, you think one guy's that good, huh?
One rock at a time?
Superman would be going, building that dude up. I understand, though, that Superman was defeated in the last movie by...
Last night he did.
he got defeated?
Last night.
It says that Cain's
I'm
wife was
depressed.
either his sister, his niece, or his great niece, etc.
No, what could have been? So what? Her name was etc.
Her name was Cain.
Her name was Cain.
Her name was Cain.
His name was Cain.
His name was Cain, and her name was Mrs. Cain.
Dig that.
Are we talking about righteousness in the sense of physical or spiritual? If we talk
Physical.
about
Physical.
patriarchs, Old Testament,
Yeah.
and they're, had the title or the association of being righteous or righteous men or right before God's eyes. Are we talking spiritually or physically?
We're talking about physically. But the physical way that you were righteous was that you obeyed perfectly the physical law of
Your
nature.
argument, he could not have been married to Cain or to a daughter of Cain.
That's correct. This is what I'm proving here, that according to this, if Milcah and Zillah and Zillah were the wives of Lamech, and Lamech was, or Zillah, which one was Noah's wife?
Naamah.
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 I got it. So why would they send us to Genesis 4:24?
Naamah is a demon described in the Zohar, a foundational work of Jewish mysticism. Is what the definition of her name is.
No, Genesis 4:22 is where it talks about her, not 4:24.
And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain. Yeah, he was the guy that worked with iron. And the reason Tubal-Cain was important, it says that his sister Tubal-Cain was Naamah, which means that Naamah and Tubal-Cain were the descendants of Cain. It would not have been logical. It would not have been consistent with logic for Noah to have married a daughter of Cain,
Boy, there's no way.
and particularly to have produced a son who was called perfect in his generation. So whatever, we'll let the Jews fly on that. I don't know either.
Well, that's back to my original question. Is he perfect in his generation physically or spiritually? Because in God's eyes, he was his guy, his man.
He may have never sinned.
Well, that's my next question. In order for them to be righteous, or justified is the proper word, is what we experience in baptism. Not that they were baptized, but that in order to have that same standing, somewhere in God's eyes, he's approved that. Okay?
And by the standard of the day, it would have been by the law of instinct. and the law of instinct is the natural law.
Sure.
And the natural law, we found out. Turn to Romans 4. I think that's Romans 4. Seems like it's verse 17.
17.
Well, I don't know.
I'll read you a little bit of it. It says, as it is written, I have made thee a father of many nations, for him whom he believed, even God, who quickeneth the dead, and calleth those things which be not as though they were.
That's the verse. That's not the verse I have in mind. That's true.
Well, verse 2 says Abraham was justified by his works. So we stuck on justification, we stuck on with a spiritual physical.
It says those who have not the law, but are obedient to the law, they become a law unto themselves.
It's 2:14, for when the Gentiles
That's it.
have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law, are a law unto themselves.
Could there and was there
2:14.
were there Gentiles who had no written covenant at that point of time? All of them didn't. It says if they had not the law, but they were obedient to the law of nature, they were a law of themselves, and they would have been declared righteous. What was the only law that Japheth could disobey that would have made him a sinner? Until he became a husband, he couldn't have obeyed that law. So, maybe when he became a husband, he fell from grace. Is that what you're telling me? That's supposed to be a joke. That's supposed to be you missed it. Yeah, it's back there.
He couldn't be a patriarch until as long as dad was still alive. So
What was the only thing that Adam sinned in disobeying?
Listening to his wife.
amen, sister.
Actually, Adam was not a good parent to his wife. Had Adam stayed at home long enough and figured out what the devil was doing, he would have corrected the situation. But it got out of hand. And the next thing you know, it got him. What was the sin of Adam? To eat the forbidden fruit. What was the sin of Eve?
She did not have sin because she was not under the covenant.
She was not under the covenant. She was not told about that she couldn't eat the fruit. What was the other sin that Adam could have committed? Not to multiply and replenish the earth. But he needed help to do that, and so Eve was complicit. Eve was the only wife that Adam ever had. Is it true that Abel might not have been, well, it had to have been. Abel was the first human being in the third heaven in the paradise of God.
You realize the denomination that teaches Cain was the offspring of Satan and had sex with Eve. That's what they teach.
Oh, well, them boys just do it.
Well, I know that. I'm trying to stay away from that. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to get into this other thing about the genetics.
What denomination teaches that? I've never heard it.
You name it.
The more liberal ones do. Probably the Mormons, the Mormonskis.
Unitarians
What the heck is he
Do they? The Unitarians? Well, they're about as liberal as you can get.
They believe that everybody say, everybody.
Oh yeah, you can't be lost.
Well, let's say no. Sure.
Well, Well, Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe that anybody goes to heaven, or just the 144,000. And so I asked one, so what do you look forward to in a life here on earth? I guess they don't know that it's going to melt down.
No.
I don't know.
Yeah, they thinking that after the tribulation's over and Jesus is reigning, that they can just go out there and have a blast being farmers. Just live here until.
I always tell them when I meet with them, they're 144,001, they're out of luck.
Okay, so the premise is this. My premise, you don't need to accept it. That Noah would not have been perfect in his generation and married a daughter of Cain.
I agree.
I think that dog will hunt, but I'm not going to stand up and say that if you don't believe that, you can't go to heaven. I'm just assuming.
But even with him going to the verse in Genesis that said about Naaman, it doesn't say anything about her being with Noah. It just says that she's the sister of Tubal-Cain.
But it does say something else. Did the sons and the daughters of Seth have confraternity or association or fellowship with the sons and the daughters at that juncture with the sons and daughters of Cain? No. It was later, because look at Genesis 6:1. The sons of Cain married the sons of,
God married the daughter of men.
yeah. And the daughters of men were the ancestry of Cain. And their thoughts were evil continually, and they got in like the Moabites did to the Jews, and they forfeited their position with God. But and at that time, the earth was pretty well peopled. Who was the big evangelist in the days of Cain and Seth?
It would have had been Adam.
Well, he would be the high priest.
Okay.
Who was the big evangelist? Who's the big preacher? Enoch. How many people did Enoch preach to? Thousands. Yes. And he was quite persuasive, quite effective. His son Methuselah died in the year of the flood. At the date of the flood, Noah was how old?
600. No.
600, wasn't it? I believe he was 600 years old. And it took him 120 years to build the ark. So you go back in time, you can see that Adam, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech. Now, who was Lamech? Now, there's two Lamechs, and this will bother you if you don't look at it. One Lamech was the son of Cain. The other Lamech was the son of Seth. Because what was the name of the father of Melchizedek? Not Melchizedek. Methuselah. Is that what you said? Thank you. What was the name of the father of Methuselah?
There was two.
That's what I said.
It was the merge. Enoch and Idris. Idris. I-T-R-I-S. Idris.
Where you see that?
Go.
Well, we don't need Google. We can go to the book for that.
Also, I did some research on that, the religions who do the seed of Satan. That's what they call it. It's the seed of Satan, or the serpent's seed. And no religion believes that. Although there's one that they theorize is Christian identity that was believed by Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, Nordic, and others.
And them Nords were those people who put that Stonehenge together, weren't they? Them boys were smart. They need something about anti-gravity, but other than that, I don't know.
They believe that they were descendants of ancient Israelites.
Genesis 5.
Genesis 5?
Yeah. Enoch lived 65 years, begat Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years, begat sons and daughters. All the sons of Enoch were 360 and 5 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And Methuselah lived 187 years, and begat Lamech.
Yeah.
Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years, and begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. And Lamech lived 182 years, and begat a son. He called his name Noah.
Right. So there was two Lamechs on both sides of the field. And the one that is being described in the 4th chapter and the 24th verse was the guy who had a son named Tubal-Cain. And Tubal-Cain gave his old man an advantage. And what advantage did he give him?
Iron, metal, weapon.
Iron and metal. He could take metal and our swords, spears, come up with a spearhead that nobody else had. I mean, call it what you want to, that's better than pieces of wood cut on a point. And he killed 2 men that way. And he went around and wrote a song and bragged about it to his wife. Look at verse 23 of Genesis 4. Lamech said unto his wives, there was another thing that Lamech did to show you he wasn't an obedient person. What was that? He was a Mormon. Had more than one wife. Wonder how come Joe Smith didn't catch that? But no, he had 2 wives. It's the first time that we know of that anybody had more than one wife. But he said to his wives, hear my voice, listen to my song. You wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. In other words, if we are disadvantaged by being associated or descendants of Cain, then look what's going to happen to our ancestry. Well, anyway, so be that as it may, Noah had 3 sons. We don't know Noah's wife. I don't, and I'm not happy with Google's idea of who she was. I think that I don't know where you'd even go to find it, not that it's important. But the thing was Japheth sinless? Okay, if Japheth was called the king of righteousness, the king of justice, the king of right standing with God, it would have to be that he was sinless. Because had he committed a sin, what sacrifice would have been offered to have that sin removed? There was none. So it doesn't matter. Yeah, the fact is that he was the oldest man and associated and akin to, which shows a type. Now, a type is the physical representation of something yet to come, and he was a type of Christ. Christ was not a type of him. Melchizedek was a type of Christ. He, of course, then, being a type of Christ, would be sinless. He, of course, then, would be a type of Christ, who would be the one who could be and was the high priest of the world. His ancestry would not be that which would be determined by obedience or disobedience, but would be determined by what he did. Then when Melchizedek met Abraham, Abraham comes along and worships at the feet of Melchizedek. Why would he worship at the feet of Melchizedek? He was a type of Christ. It was a picture of something that was to come about. And, sir?
A little lost. So, isn't righteousness faith in Christ?
It is now.
Right, but it was back then as well.
No, sir. There was no Christ to have faith in that they knew.
They foreshadowed him through the animal sacrifices. So they were
forward.
Right. So, to say that righteousness and sin are two different things, they're two different categories. So righteousness just meant faith. As long as you're obedient. For instance, Cain and Abel knew to have animal sacrifices. Why?
Because Adam taught him.
Right, because God had to teach Adam, right? And he handed it down. So they were righteous sons if they continually had animal sacrifices.
Okay,
Does it mean
show
they
me.
had sin or not sin?
Show me where Noah ever offered an animal sacrifice.
If he was righteous in the eyes of God.
You've got to prove that that was a part of a faith. And I'm telling you, you get here late. I'm telling you it is not.
Didn't he offer one as soon as he got the ark?
Turn to Romans 2:14. Huh?
Didn't he offer one as soon as he got the ark?
Noah did.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what you said. Show me where Noah did.
But why would Noah then offer the sacrifice then? He was the high priest of the world.
Right.
Correct. And being the high priest of the world, of course, there might have been a small congregation, but being a high priest of the world, he offered the animal sacrifice. What animal did he offer? Doesn't say as far as I know.
I thought it was one of each of the animals.
Well, let's go see. Not as far as I know.
But even the animal sacrifice didn't.
But it was a picture of what was coming, just like Melchizedek. See, right now everything going on is a picture of what's coming.
Sure.
Now wait a minute, let's talk about the religion of Cain and Abel. Should have been of Cain, of Abel and Adam and his sons. Now Cain was different. He's a different dude. There was things told to Adam that were never told to anybody else. We got on this, was it last week? When it was talk about this leave and cleave business. Somebody else said, well, I'm staying with my wife because I made her a promise. I got to either leave or cleave. I said, I don't believe your name's Adam. Is anybody else was ever told to do that? Well, I mean, stop and think about it. All right, where are we? At Romans 2:14. For the Gentile who had not the law. Read it.
For when the Gentiles which have not the law do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves.
And the law of nature was all they had. Now, what the law of nature taught, we know. Look at a child. They are born with the law of nature. It's the law of instinct. It's the law of sinlessness. It's the law that sin cannot be committed. It's the law of a lot of things. So, Japheth was a son of righteousness. And because of that, he was the high priest of the world after Adam died. What about Adam's wife? I mean, not Adam, Noah. What about Noah's wife? We didn't have female high priest. There was no such animal like that until they ceased to follow the law of nature. The law of nature talks about the law of the first order. And the first order was never the female, it was always the male. So that's contradictory. That's a slap in the face. Getting back to where we were headed, Abraham came from the battle of the kings.
Did you say that Noah had never made a animal sacrifice?
As far as I know.
I've got something else.
Read it.
Genesis 8 and 20.
Who?
Genesis 8 and 20.
But when was that?
That was post-landing.
Yeah, that's after landing. And Mount Ararat.
He was saying previously that.
Okay, what sin did Noah commit that would have caused him to offer that sacrifice? Or was it that at that time a sacrifice was made that would refer to the rolling ahead, the removal of, or the acknowledgement of the fact that there was sin?
Because he's already received receive salvation and returning into the kingdom of the ark. So
I don't believe you can establish that as a fact. I mean, I'm just,
you can argue either way, but the evidence we have said when he got off the ark, he had already been saved, him and his family. So the salvational part, we have to understand. So where would you think the sin would come in as far as?
I don't think the offering that Noah did had anything to do with sin.
I don't either.
I think it was an offering of thanksgiving.
Sure.
And I think the offering of thanksgiving is what we participate in the church today in this Lord's Supper. I think that pattern follows all the way through. Not that the Gentiles understood it, not that they knew what was going on, but it was set up as a practice.
It was a covenant relationship.
With whom?
With Noah.
God made a covenant. What covenant did God make with Noah?
That's why he's one of the horsemen in Revelation.
Okay, and what covenant?
Because when God cut the seal that bound men, that was one of the seals that he cut, was Noah's, which is the covenant he made through a blood sacrifice, which was the first time that Noah ever had a blood sacrifice.
And is a covenant that was
So it
established.
Covenant relationship. That's exactly what it was. It wasn't just a Thanksgiving.
And what was the covenant?
That his sins would be rolled in.
No, sir.
He was a new high priest. He had to pray for his sons and his sons' sons and all of them. He was a high priest.
What was the covenant, though, that God made with Noah? A covenant is, what was the marriage? What was the God says, you do this, I'll do this. You're now a part of my family, friends, sons. You're righteous. What was the covenant?
But he never flood the earth.
That's exactly right. That's the only covenant I know he ever made with Noah. And of course, then the sacrifice would be in thanksgiving for the covenant. And how did God show that covenant? By the rainbow. Now, when the rainbow comes out today, is that covenant with you and I? No, it was just with Noah. Just like Adam was told to multiply and replenish the earth.
There goes the camera.
Oh, I bet I look good now.
Or not.
Or not.
Look like bummies.
Screensaver's on.
Well, let me make a statement. If Eve was the mother of all living,
They know if.
okay, would that be a parallel, meaning
The Church of Christ.
The plan, and those that didn't receive the plan, physical and spiritual, in the sense that there was two types of people, right? Good and bad, however you want to say it. There's a genetic line of those that followed Cain, all through down Esau and the Adamites, not the Adamites, the Edomites. And the other branch would be where Melchizedek and Abraham, that bunch, followed in a parallel. Right or wrong?
Well, it could be. The thing we're trying to do is go back to something that you have to put a whole lot of thought into. The point being, we're trying to prove who Melchizedek is because of his definition.
Sure.
His name defined justice, righteousness.
Sure.
That's the reason he was called the last part of his word, the name. He was also called the Prince of Peace, or the King of Peace. He was the King of Salem. And the name means, if I got this correct, and I'm sure I do, is Malchi Testeo. And Jesus is called righteousness, which is Tiskandu, which is the takeoff of the same word. You'll find this all through the Old Testament. That was his title. So when Noah offered his sacrifice, I don't think it was because of sin. I don't know what sin Noah could have committed. He moved his family way up in the sticks where there wasn't any lakes and alligators, and he built the ark. He did what God asked him to do. And the reason God asked him to build that, he said, you do this, I'll save your family. They were saved, not from sin, but from the people that lived in that society that had just completely gone ape and crazy. Then Abraham comes along, and he makes obeisance to a man that was perfect, just by his name. Does that mean sinless? As far as we can determine, sin against the nature of a person like Japheth was not a violation of a covenant, except the covenant of nature to which all men were bound. And it's just some intended to follow it and some intended not to. And I thought of this a while ago when you were talking about that woman. In the family of Noah, there was a young man named Ham. Ham was the opposite, seemingly, of Japheth. Shem was kind of the middle of the road boy. He wanted to see who's going to win the battle. That's kind of the way I get it. And that may not be right. But the fact is that these people existed. Did they have a covenant with God? Yes, the covenant of nature. Could they sin? Yes, if they broke the covenant or covenants of nature. Did they have any idea that those sins could be rolled ahead? No. That didn't come until the Levitical priesthood. So why would the Old Testament priest offer sacrifices? Noah offered his sacrifice after he landed. He then had a covenant with God that had not existed before. I think it's Genesis 9 and 8. That the covenant was that you couldn't take the life of another human being. But the covenant, or that God gave him a command, but the covenant that Noah had with God was that he'd never destroy the world with water again. And if you've seen these new destruction movies of the world, they either got stars or water that's destroying the world. I don't know if you've paid any attention. The last one was they put the big boats up, and they got all the Northeast Democrats. They spent all their money and put it in their 7 or 8 boats, and everybody that was up there in that area had their place on a boat, and the rest of us just got to drown. I don't know what that movie was. I've seen it once or twice.
The Titanic?
Was that what it was? Okay, could have been. I don't know. But I think somebody's trying to tell us something. But anyway, the fact is that Melchizedek existed. The fact is that he was a real person. The fact is that Abraham came to him to offer what we call, and this is what you've got to be careful about, we call worship. But from the law of nature, that is not worship. So, what Abraham offered was a tenth, and we call it a tithe. But that cannot be a tenth or a tithe, because the tithe had never been heard of. Just so you'll know, not to misguide anybody, Jacob offered God 10%. When? The night that he went and laid down his head at Bethel on the rock. And he said, God, if you'll bless me. The problem is the King James translators has messed up the message, because neither Jacob nor Abraham was offering a tithe. For a tithe to be offered, you would be exactly right, there would have to be a covenant. There was no covenant but nature.
Tithe just means a 10th portion. It doesn't necessarily have the connotation as something that came from the Levitical priesthood. It just means a 10th portion.
But the tithe or the 10th portion was never heard of.
Are you saying that?
And they have used the wording.
Are you saying he used the wrong word describing the portion of the spoils that he offered to?
Yeah.
Because is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
It's not a tithe.
No,
It's a 10% of the. what he sold
it's not
for.
really even a 10%. They just stuck it in there. You go back and look at the original language, and it will not be found. And then what Jacob offered was the same thing. Jacob ever give the Lord the tithe? No. If you're using the word tithe. Now, let me define tithe for you. No, don't let me define it. Let's let God define tithe, because this mess up your mind. And we'll not go into this tonight, but I looked it up, so I read it down. The tithe could not and did not occur until the Jew got into the promised land. That is something that's very interesting. The
priesthood had to be supported some way, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what we'll get into is that Abraham, when he came, did not offer the agricultural blessings that the tribes of Israel were commanded to pay in order to support the priesthood. It's going to be something that's going to be very interesting to you. The agricultural produce in the land of Israel was that on which they paid tithes. Only the farmers. The rest of them didn't. And it's more than interesting when we go to study this. 40 years in the desert, when they were going, they didn't. Before they began to cultivate their own fields, if you will read, I think it's in Deuteronomy 12, 8 and 9. Turn over there right quick. We'll just skip ahead a little bit. Deuteronomy 12, 8 and 9.
It says, "Ye shall not do after all the things that we do here this day. Every man whatsoever is right in his own eyes. For ye are not as ye come to the rest and to the inheritance which the Lord your God giveth you."
Okay, they out in the field did not do that. So when we get to the right of the inheritance, maybe it's Deuteronomy 18, 1 through 5. I've got them 2 or 3 places written down.
Where are we going?
Deuteronomy 18, 1 through 5.
And it says, the priests, the Levites, and all the tribe of Levi shall have no part, nor inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offering to the Lord made by fire in his inheritance. Therefore shall they have no inheritance among their brethren. The Lord is their inheritance, as he hath said unto them. And this shall be the priests' due from the people, from them that offer a sacrifice, whether it be ox or sheep. And they shall give unto the priest the shoulder, and the 2 cheeks, and the maw, the first fruit also of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thy oil, and the first of the fleece of thy sheep shalt thou give him. The Lord thy God hath chosen him out of all thy tribes to stand to minister in the name of the Lord, him and his sons forever.
Okay, see, at first it was the firstborn son of every Jew. Then the Lord chose the Levite. And the way he supported the Levite was not to allow them to have property. They didn't have an inheritance. It's interesting when you find out that the Roman Catholic Church calls their preachers clergy. The word clergy means an inheritor of the property. They think they're the only ones that can have this blessing. We'll continue to go into this, but what I want to do is show you that Abraham only did this one time. Jacob is never heard of, although he made a promise, but it wasn't the tithe or the 10%. What Abraham brought back and offered to Melchizedek were the people that had been taken captive. He did not say, here, and here's your $50. Keep it for the work you're doing. So it's an interesting thing that will be involved when we get to discussing this. If you were here Sunday night, you heard me start the premise that teaches that the people today who thinks that they can be supported by the church as a separate, distinct evangelistic work do not have the support of the New Testament. Now that is interesting. When we go through this and you see everything that Paul wrote, everything that the Lord, because you see, the one thing that we do not understand is that in the Church of Christ today we have one priest. That's Christ. He's the inheritor. And we serve him in the capacity of being those who preach the gospel. Think of the name, think of the office. King of Salem, priest of the Most High God. Age had everything to do with it because he was the closest thing to the only man akin to everybody in the world. If his title meant anything, and I'm going to tell you, the only thing I can assume is that it did, he was called the Righteous One, which, if we can understand the Hebrew language, that meant that he was the one who was just or righteous or sinless. Now, does righteous mean sinless? I think you can prove that it does. Did Melchizedek ever offer a sacrifice? No.
But we don't have enough.
We don't know.
verses to know.
Yeah, when we're talking about things we don't know and we do know, we're just trying to establish something as we go forward to find out who this man was, what he was doing. And I jump back and forth from the Old Testament to the New Testament, but most of the time when people make a mistake about Melchizedek, they try to apply laws of the Old Testament, frankly, and laws before the Old Testament. Laws that were in the patriarchal dispensation before there were covenantal laws at all, to things that are in the New Testament, and you just can't do that. You'll get in trouble. Methuselah. Know what the name means? To die in the year of the flood. You know what year Methuselah died? In the year of the flood.
Imagine that.
His daddy named him.
How did they get the names on the mark? How did they get their names like that?
Yeah. It was prophetic providence. And they would name the children by what they would be and become known as. All right, that's as far as we could go tonight. Hopefully we accomplish some good things. And we'll start here with the new microphone. We ought to have been able to be heard whether it was confusing or not. And we're going to turn to number 429. Would you stand, please?